Hi, and welcome to the AMEC Summit. I am Shannon Bowen, full professor of public relations at the University of South Carolina, as well as the founder and executive director of the Global Strategic Communication Consortium, which is a nonprofit of top scholars around the world devoted to advancing ethics and futurism in our industry. I hope that I will be able to give you a very good overview today of research being presented in person at the AMEC conference by Mary Beth West. This is a very interesting project on gaslighting, and because I study ethics, gaslighting has always been a part of my work in terms of deception. But when Mary Beth suggested this particular study and topic, I was very excited. As a student of film noir, I remember the 1944 film named Gaslight, in which a young husband tried to convince his heiress wife that she was going insane. That way, no one would question if she were to commit suicide and he could inherit her fortune. In this film noir classic, gaslighting was used in an interpersonal violence sense and a deceptive way. But we're talking about organizational gaslighting for our study, and I'd like to whet your appetite a little bit with results from the research that we've already done. This project has been going on for almost a year. And I am delighted that Mary Beth West was the progenitor and inspiration for this study. I also need to mention my co-authors, Dr. Alina Ertzikova at Central Michigan University, Lana Ivanitskaya, also at Central Michigan University, Kurt Key at Texas Tech University, and of course, Mary Beth West as an independent researcher. When we began to study gaslighting, we were thinking of it in terms of has it ever been studied before in our discipline, and how can we learn more about the work that's already been done? So we already did what's called a bibliometric analysis. The bibliometric analysis, I'll share with you on my screen here just a brief overview of that study. We looked at the literature and found that 170 articles mentioned gaslighting. However, that literature it's both good and bad news. The literature talks about gaslighting in terms of medical, healthcare, and interpersonal contexts, but more rarely when it talks about public relations, communication, or interpersonal communication in an organizational sense. So that means a lot more work needs to be done. I'd like to show you some formative findings, and this particular node analysis is from a proprietary software program analyzing literature. It's called VOS Viewer, and the viewer shows us here in graphic representation form the predominance of the terms that were mentioned in our literature for gaslighting. So we can see here the largest node is intimate partner violence, the second largest epistemic injustice, and so on. So we don't have a lot of public relations literature or even general communication and mass communication literature talking yet about gaslighting. But we do see down here at the bottom of this node analysis misinformation, civil society, contextualism. These are things that we study in public relations, as well as risk and betrayal, crisis. So these are the types of things that we talk about in our literature often. We just haven't really studied gaslighting in conjunction with those. And then, of course, on the ethical side of things, we have self-trust and autonomy, as well as agency over here on the left. So these are terms that appear in the ethics literature and moral philosophy literature quite often, yet we haven't really seen them emerge in terms of studying gaslighting. And so I'm going to stop the screen share now, but if you would like to be able to cite this research, it is citable under the author's names and paper presented May 13th, 2025 at the Global Strategic Communication Consortium's conclave in Sardinia, Italy. And I would be happy to share this handout with you if you email me at sbowen@sc.edu. So, to get back to what we're doing with this research moving forward, based on that literature analysis, we also did some formative focus groups at the Ethics and Compliance Institute's annual conference in Florida. We found that people were familiar with the term gaslighting, although they might not have used that term themselves. They immediately related to the concept. So, this isn't a foreign concept to our field, it's just perhaps something that we've been using other terms for, such as manipulation, spin doctoring, deception, massaging an issue, etc. But we think it's important to bring into the public lexicon our responsibility of ethics, honesty, and integrity, as well as how to avoid gaslighting for communication professionals. So, in those focus groups, we found that gaslighting had been used or seen probably the most often in the governmental context with law enforcement agencies, for example, in their public communication about an investigation, or in a public policy initiative in which a policy was changed quietly or surreptitiously, and then the agency did not acknowledge that change, but apparently would tell people they were confused. This has always been the policy. It was just refined slightly, but this is what we believe. So these are very deceptive approaches to communication. And we define gaslighting also as including blaming the victim, scapegoating, in other words, intentionally confusing an issue, as well as just policy changes on an organizational level that are secretly adapting to public pressure and trying to confuse an issue by saying we've always had this perspective or we have these core values and here's what we've always stood behind. You must be remembering that incorrectly when we labeled something as terrorism or whatever the agency said. And so gaslighting has implications across the field of public relations for our industry. We're going to be going forward with an academic study with the authors that I just mentioned. This study is going to examine communication professionals across the board in their careers. And it will be conducted by a data collection agency so that we are not interacting with data collection personally. We're paying for that data to be collected, and then we analyze that data so that people are more candid because we realize people might not want to say if they think they can be tracked, if they have been subjected to gaslighting or asked to engage in gaslighting by their superior or by their clients. So by having this double layer of anonymity between us and the data collection, we hope that people will be candid. And we want to interview communication professionals across the industry, everything from content creation to marketing communication, as well as integrated advertising and public relations, corporate communication, and agency communication as well, because we want to get the width of the gaslighting experience across the field and see if it's particularly predominant in any subfield of the communication disciplines. We also are including people at all levels because we speculate, and this is speculation based on our research questions, that maybe those at the higher levels of the field don't engage in gaslighting so often because they realize the reputational damage that can come from it, but those at mid and entry levels do engage in gaslighting more often because they feel powerless to say no to their supervisors or to their clients. But again, this is based on literature review and what we as academics think we might find. So we're doing a random proportional sample across all levels of the communication professions to make sure that we capture people who have just come out, 1 to 3 years of experience, 5 on, and then the senior levels as well, so we can compare and contrast. We also are looking at educational background to see if having a degree in public relations makes a difference, if one can spot those ethical problems if they've had a prior ethics class or a degree in public relations, or they happened upon this because they're good writers or good communicators or good policy analysts. And so by looking at these data, we believe that we're going to be able to shed some light on how often gaslighting occurs within our industry, how often communication professionals are asked to engage in gaslighting or manipulation of information, and how often they refuse. How often do they say to their clients or their senior management, I'm sorry, we really shouldn't be doing that. We need to be honest and forthright about this issue. And if we're going to make a change or say that there was a mistake, we need to acknowledge that and be honest with our publics to build that relationship for the long term so that our stakeholders learn they can trust us even if we've made a mistake to be forthcoming with them. And so it's going to be very interesting to see these results. And I hope that you will attend Mary Beth West's session as part of AMEC, where she can expand on these findings and give you more insights into the research and what we're hoping to find in our upcoming study and data collection that will be taking place this summer. We thank you for your time and attention, and your thoughts and feedback are always welcome. Thanks again. Bye-bye.